I know many of you are wanting to learn how to go out and find sources about your ancestor when they don't show up in this record hint area. And so that's what I'll be teaching today. These record hints, I'll just click on this really quick. I want to show you, they pertain to her children, of when her children were married and were born. But I want to find more sources about Mary herself. When I click on her sources, you can see that I already have an 1880 census and a 1900 when she lived with her parents. But I'm missing from 1910 through the 1940 census, and then of course I've got her great death certificate and her find-a-grave. But I want to find those other sources, and even a marriage record with her getting married would be wonderful. So in order to do this, the first step I'm going to take is I will click on Family Search, because remember, when I'm working in Family Tree, I want the bulk of my sources to come from Family Search, and that's because every time I attach a source from Family Search into my person's personal detail page, I'm letting the computer know that, hey, this is my ancestor, try to go find me record hints now. And that's why I want to pull them from Family Search. And it's great to attach sources from these other three companies, that's wonderful, but it doesn't give Family Search power to go find me record hints when I choose these other three websites to go into and attach their sources into my tree. But sometimes you have to do that, and we all know that, and that's great and wonderful, but we're going to start with Family Search. So let's dive into this. When I click on Family Search, the first thing I want you to notice is how by default the computer is going to fill out certain fields for me. So all of these different areas, the name, the birthplace, the death place, they're called fields. And by default, it just decides what to put in there, and then it will come up with sources that can match this information as closely as they possibly can. So from here, as I look at this, none of these top ones were even a hit. And we'll understand why in just a minute, because they're basically going off death records, and she didn't die as a Williams. She actually was a Richardson. So one of the first things I wanted to go do is change her maiden name to her married name, and that way it's going to ask the computer to go find these other records that I'm looking for. Now, something else I want to go do is get rid of the death place, because death is not found on a census record or a marriage record, right? So you would think that all you'd have to do is hit on that X, but I want you to know once I do that and then go back open the death, it still sits there. So we're going to actually have to highlight it and delete that information to get rid of it. And then you can shrink it back down so you can see the rest. Now, let's just change that for now. Just her last name, and scroll down, let's see, and hit update. All right, now this brings back up all these records that pertain to Mary Ella Richardson. But you can see that as I look at this, the top two have nothing to do with her. This 1940 census actually is her and her daughter. So if I open that up, you can see that she is a widow and her daughter's living with her at 23. But she comes out of this Dan River area. Now, how would I go find these other census records? Well, for me, I would actually choose to go add a field over here, and I'm going to click on residence, and I'm going to say that I believe that she came from Pennsylvania, Virginia. And the reason I believe that is because she died in Pennsylvania. She was born in Pennsylvania, Virginia. So, of course, I'm thinking that she lived there her whole life. So let's go see if we actually put that we want to go from the 1910 to the 1940 just to see if we can pull open more census records. We can scroll down here and say update. When I click on update, that refreshes all the information to where the computer will go find other things for me. Now, isn't this great that my top three hits have to do with my ancestor? We've already seen this 1940 census, but this 1930, we can see that her mother's actually living with her at this point with children. And then in the 1920, we see that she's living with her husband. So how wonderful is that to go from, if we look back at her personal detail page, having no children listed there, to now if we open up one of these census records and scroll down a little bit, we can see that there's 5 children listed there. So isn't that wonderful? Just so you know, I have looked over this 1920, 1930, and 1940 census record information to make sure it really did belong to my Mary Ellen Williams, and they really do. I just didn't want to take your time in doing that also. All right, we're missing the 1910 census still. So how would I go find that with it not popping up for me? First of all, I would come over to this field and I'd say, now my goal is I just want to find the 1910, nothing else besides that. I still believe that she was in Pennsylvania, Virginia. So with changing just the year range, I would go back down and click on Update and see if that pulled up any more information for me. Now, as I look at these different sources, they don't pertain to my Mary Ellen Williams. And as I got to looking over the census records, it showed in the 1930 census that she actually got married at age 31. So I'm thinking, you know what, she probably wasn't even married in 1910 yet. So I'm going to take back her maiden name and plug it back in there, and then I will go click on Update and see if I can find her not married. This actual top one is the hit I'm looking for. I found her living with her parents, and she's single, and as I go look at the original, she actually is a school teacher at the time. I also went back and looked at the 1900 census, and she is living in the same place with some of the same siblings. And so it got kind of exciting when I put all of this together. So let me close this off right here because I want us to be able to just focus here on the left-hand side. One of the most important things for me to do is to have a goal in mind, because that's going to determine which fields I'm going to be filling out, which determines the different sources that will be coming back from the computer. For instance, if I want to find her marriage record, I personally would be getting rid of her birthplace because not all marriage records list the birth, so I would be getting rid of that. I would also be getting rid of this residence place. And I would choose, you know, I'm looking for the marriage record, so hey, let's fill in the marriage place, which should be also, once again, this Pennsylvania, or Virginia. And the year, I'm assuming, I'm going to put a year range on here from maybe 1908 until let's go 1912, because I really do believe she got married in 1910, just after that census record was taken. From here, I'll click on Update and see what the computer brings back. As I have glanced through this, I don't see that any of these pertain to her marriage. And that's okay. My goal is just to teach you how to use these fields right now. Now, I could also add her spouse to try to go look for that also, but I want you to be aware of down here where it says Restrict Records By, pay attention to the location and the type, because I can click on location and I can type in a country or a state and say, don't show me anything unless it's coming from this country or this state. Or I can click on type and say, okay, don't show me anything but marriages. See how over here on the right-hand side, I'm getting census records, I'm getting birth, getting different things, even deaths, but I just want to see marriage records. So I'm going to click on marriage and update that, and then you'll see the computer was forced just to throw me back marriage records only. Let me look over here and see if there's anything else. Now, one of the things that I want you to be aware of is don't be afraid to get rid of names. I could really get rid of her first name and just used her last name, and I could put in her spouse's last name of Richardson, and I could just search by last names only and see if that found anything. Oftentimes when I'm looking for census records, sometimes the indexer got the last name batched so bad that oftentimes I'll delete the last name and just search off first names if I have a residence and a year that I'm looking for. We can't be afraid to delete fields, even if it's the name. Sometimes I'll get rid of the name completely and just search off of a place and a year. And oftentimes I have found stuff that way too, especially if I'm restricting records by one of these options here. There really aren't rules to filling out these different fields that sit inside of this area. It's an art. And so basically you just got to learn to play and be okay with deleting and adding information according to the goal you have in mind. So really that's the most important thing, is have a goal, whether it's trying to find a census record or a military record. Have the goal, and that will help you to know which fields you're going to be filling out according to that goal. Another thing you need to understand is not all sources are on Familysearch.org. You may need to jump into another website to see if that particular source is in their website. So if you've been playing in these fields and switching things up and getting really creative with it and you're still not finding your source coming back to you, go back to that main page of your ancestor and go try Ancestry or Find My Past or My Heritage and see if that particular source is found within those 3 websites. Now remember that some sources are not even online yet. And so you might have to come to grips with that and realize you might have to go find it in person, and that's okay too. Let me just mention one last thing. If I were to click into Family Search, telling the computer I want you to go look for sources on my ancestor, we only viewed the results within this record area right here. But pay attention how it says collections over here on the right. Here it's showing birth, marriage, and death collections, and I can choose the ones that pertain to my ancestor. And if I want to have the computer look into it, I'll put a check mark next to it. There are 128 within this feedback that it gave me, and I can sit here and go down and pick all the ones that just pertain to Virginia because I believe this lady never left Virginia. And I could be wrong on that, but that's, just what I'm getting from the information I've been looking at. So I would just click the things that have to do with Virginia, and then I would come back up and say, okay, let's close that down and come look at census records that I want the computer to go through those different collections. I can look at all 27. Once I'm done looking at it, close it back up and then go down to the different areas that's offering me. Once I get my ones marked, then I'll come back up to the top and say filter these results. And then I'm only seeing the collections I asked it to go dive into. I can actually exit out of any of these at any point if I feel they're not doing me any good, but that's just another way to tell the computer to go see the actual collections that will hit the goal I'm really aiming for. There's a number of ways to go find sources for your ancestors, and so I'll be doing many videos for the different ways. The next one will be on how to use filters to go find sources.